Hello and welcome to the Anomaly Project, the show that looks at all aspects of the paranormal and anomalous world. I'm Marcus Lowth, and joining me as he does every week is Steve Mera. Now, Steve, it's going to be another enthralling show, astral projection, out of body experiences. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing really well, mate. I love all this consciousness stuff, or should we say alternate consciousness, It fascinates me because the elements of it are seeping through into every single quarter of, be it the supernatural, paranormal, ufological, everybody's sort of talking consciousness. And of course, it's always fascinating to hear those people's experiences and latest research, really, what people are doing on that sort of area, because I think it does get overlooked quite a little bit too often.
Yeah. I mean, I second all of that. So, I mean, our guest this evening is researcher and author Graham Nicholls. So, first of all, Graham, thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's good to be on here.
No, it's good to have you on here. I'm really looking forward to this. So we've got a lot to get through. I think the best place to start would be, if you work in astral projection and out of body experiences, how did you become involved in that, Graham? Is it something that you went out of your way to learn, or is it something that you just found you had an ability to do, or even a combination of the two? If you could speak to us
Kind of
about
both, yeah.
that.
Kind of
Right.
a combination. I had my first experiences around the age of 11 or 12, just spontaneously. Didn't know what they were. There was no paranormal side to my background, or my parents weren't interested in religion or spiritual things or anything like that. So yeah, I just had some experiences, and that led me to then try and find out what happened. And that's when I discovered there was a thing called out of body experiences. So that would have been around 13 and a half, something like that. I discovered there was such a thing. And then basically devoted myself to learning it. I think when I'm very interested in a topic, I can become very hyper focused on it, and
Yeah.
I was like that basically. And I it took me 6 months to learn, but then when I sort of had my first experience, which was a very powerful experience. It was like a surge of energy went through my body, and I found myself floating above myself, looking back at myself. So quite classic in that sense, but I felt like there was almost like a pole running through my body, so I could only rotate side to side. I couldn't move anywhere else. So that was the first induced experience. My experiences before that had been in a sort of upright vertical position, just a little bit off the ground and quite a long way from where my body was. So those were quite unusual, those very first experiences. But yeah, so I learned to do it. And then I met a teacher, Douglas Baker, who was already teaching about astral projection in London. He used to do weekly lectures and things, and I started attending his events. And then eventually he kind of took me under his wing, offered me my first weekend job, which was helping him basically set up the astral projection talks and different areas of esoteric thought. He was very into sort of Alice Bailey and people like that, more theosophical kind of side of things. Um, and yeah, so I moved from there basically.
I mean, it's interesting stuff. I mean, what do you think sparked those initial experiences? I mean, because you say you weren't like exactly looking for it. Do you think it's something? Two questions here, I guess. Do you think it's something that is in the chemical makeup of your brain, basically? And do you think it's something that everybody can do? It's just something that they need to kind of find in themselves, for want of a better phrase.
I think it could be something to do with the makeup of the brain. It could also be to do with environmental factors. I grew up in a tower block that was quite unusual. It almost looks like an antenna or something. It was
Oh,
one
right.
of the first buildings in London that they did the cladding to, which has
Oh,
now
yes.
become infamous. But
Yeah.
it was one of the first buildings they did that to, and it had a very unusual look because of that. There were quite a few paranormal things associated with that building. There was a haunting that my mother directly had a kind of experience related to on the 12th floor of the building, because she was a carer, home help, basically. Um, and she used to look after a lady who lived in this flat on the 12th floor. And then that woman passed away, and a mother and daughter moved into the flat. and they started seeing the old lady basically. And my mum was able to confirm that by the description that what they'd seen was consistent with the old lady that lived there. So that was in the same building. And I also had an apparition experience when I was 5 in the same building. So there seemed to be something interesting about that building as well, I would say.
You don't still live there now, though, Graham. You've moved on
No.
since then, yeah?
Yeah, I don't live there anymore.
Okay.
It's interesting, though, that you mentioned the building, because we speak about locations all the time, and like certain other locations and buildings on occasion kind of like almost trap energy. And do you feel this could be the case here? I mean, it could be whether it's built on land that something's happened on, or even just the fact that there's so many families. So in essence, so many energies cooped together in. What are your thoughts on that? Because it seems to come up a lot, locations being important.
I think they are important, and I do think there may have been something to that. It's interesting, actually. I had another out-of-body experience where I seemed to go back in time to before the building was actually there. And I saw basically Victorian London. I saw lots of people dressed in, typical Victorian sort of clothing, and market stall holders wearing quite flamboyant stuff, which I later discovered was actually quite common in London in those days. But I didn't know about that. I guess, like a lot of people assume, everyone's in sort of drab colours in the Victorian era to some degree, but it turned out that wasn't always the case. But yeah, in this particular out-of-body experience, I came out of the window of the building and I went across the big main Roman road, which was Edgware Road, big road, and I turned around, and where the building would have been was an open, grassy area with a kind of chapel or a small church, something like that. So it seemed like it was some kind of churchyard or religious site, something like that, from what I could tell. And then later on, I was able to find a map from that era that verified the experience and showed that there was in fact an area of land and a small church there at that time. So possibly that could have something to do with it. I don't know the reason. I mean, another possibility is just the sheer shape and structure of the building. I always found that kind of interesting. Right outside my bedroom window, there was a building that was lower than where my window was, and it had literally a perfect pyramid right outside my bedroom window. So in my early out-of-body experiences, I would go from my bedroom window and I would kind of land on this pyramid structure right outside my bedroom. So yeah, there was a lot of unusual things about the area, very sort of ancient sites around and things like that. So
certainly sounds very energetic, that location. And I've come across something similar before. There's a building in Manchester town centre called Sunlight House, and geologically it's charging. You've got these very large girders that go down into the ground, and it's underground. There's a lot of water there from the old underground canals and things that used to flow in there, generating a huge amount of electromagnetic radiation, which seemingly it's built like an antenna in a sense of speaking, like what you said. And it was off the chart in regarding EMF. Did you ever check to see what EMF levels? Did you ever get a chance to do that?
I didn't while I was living there, no. But that's definitely something that would be interesting, or also infrasound, possibly as well. Those are two things I use in my research.
Well, of course, infrasound can happen when wind hits certain buildings when they've just been built. I mean, they throw up buildings anyhow these days, but I mean, back in sort of ancient times, they probably thought, oh no, let's not do that. The wind's coming from this direction, because it can cause infrasonics, and it can cause unusual pressures. But it is interesting. I think it might be, initially probably tied to that location, but of course, as you've learned to do this more often, the big question is, are you just witnessing the world around you as it normally is during that condition, or do you actually see external things that you wouldn't expect to see in the normal world?
Well, I do explore other levels, but I guess because I take quite a scientific perspective, I'm always cautious about going too far down that road, because it's very hard to know for sure the objectivity of what I've
Of course.
seen. And I guess in this field, sorry, there's a tendency to go too far down that road and just sort of believe everything that you encounter in these experiences. So when I go to other levels, let's say, I tend to kind of take them with a pinch of salt, let's say.
Right. Have you ever witnessed anybody else who's
Yeah,
might be doing the
many
same thing?
times. Yeah, I've had shared experiences. I've been witnessed while out of body as a shadow figure. I know that's often of interest to people in the paranormal area,
Yeah.
but nothing negative associated with it. And yeah, generally experience what seem to be people who've passed away, and also what seem to be beings from other levels as well. So
Can I just pick up on something you said there about, you mentioned about almost traveling back in time, or excuse me, or at least having a vision, excuse me, of the past. I've certainly not explored this to the level you have, but I have kind of experimented with astral projection. I certainly tried to. There's a road near me, and basically I spent days and weeks concentrating on this. It's an ancient road, and it connects the village and it has done for hundreds of years. And, just trying to imagine what that looked like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And this was around the time I was experimenting with out-of-body experiences. And then one evening, I just had a flash. And I can't say necessarily that I was there or I'd left my body, but I just had this flash of what I kind of just felt I knew was the road hundreds of years ago. So do you think that I find the aspects of visions of the past and such and time travel? Have you had any more experiences like that? And do you think almost out of body and astral projection could, again, not wanting you to nail anything to the post here, but could unlock sort of the secrets of time travel, and it could actually be more to do with consciousness and actually physically traveling back in time?
Well, I've had my famous precognitive experiences. There's actually sort of two of them: the Soho bombing that happened in '99, and then also the 7/7 bombing that happened in 2005. I had precognitive OBEs of both of those. I have had some other fleeting experiences of going back in time, but that's not as robust as the experience that I just described, because that one lasted for probably 20 minutes or so, and I was moving down the road. I was going, I was looking at different details, and it was quite in depth in terms of what I was able to perceive. My other sort of experiences with the past have been more like what you described, like maybe a glimpse or something, just also kind of psychometry type experiences, when I've gone to ancient sites around the UK or even abroad. Had an amazing one in a cave in Bali, actually, where I kind of touched the wall and I got all this imagery that seemed to be very ancient. Again, hard to know, hard to verify, but it felt very similar to experiences that I have been able to verify. So it felt like a genuine experience.
And that kind of sounds like almost like a transference of energy. People speak about the stone tape theory and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's facts, but I get exactly what you're saying though, when you sometimes touch certain buildings, or just, it doesn't even have to be a well-known building, and you get that kind of sense that runs through you. I'm not sure if you'll be comfortable speaking about it, actually. I'm aware, we actually detailed your Soho experience on an episode previously, but I was actually unaware to the extent of the July 7th bombings. Would you be comfortable detailing that and what you actually saw? And because that I find that fascinating.
Well, that one was interesting because it was more elaborate, but unfortunately, the difference was when I had the Soho experience, there were 4 people in the room when it happened. Oh. So they literally witnessed the out-of-body experience. When I had the 7/7 one, there was no one present at the time. But with that particular one, I found myself above Moorgate Station in sort of the city of London. And I came down from above it, and I went down literally through the pavement, and I found myself in the eastbound tunnel of the underground. So I was literally floating in the middle of where the trains run. and a train like came in and literally kind of went through me, and I was kind of standing in the train essentially, and then and I stayed in the same position, and then the train pulled out and went into the tunnel, and I decided to follow the train as it pulled away, and so I kind of went into the tunnel. The train then went into Liverpool Street, and I kind of came up behind the train. And then I had this strong sense that I should stay at that position, that I shouldn't go further. And so then the train pulled away again, and it pulled away. I stayed where I was, and about, a few minutes, hard to say, a minute, I'm not sure, but after a period of time, this wave of energy hit me, like an emotional wave, which also happened in the Soho experience. So I had this energy sort of hit me in the chest, and then there was this, all at the same time. Really, there was kind of this explosion, and I realised that I'd seen a bombing again. So as that sort of energy hit me in the chest, as happened in the Soho one as well, that sort of started to bring me out of the experience. And it almost felt like the emotional anguish of the people who'd been harmed or killed in the actual event. So I came out of the experience, and then, as with the Soho experience, I didn't know when it was going to happen, but I believed that it would happen, especially as this was only sort of 6 years after that one had happened. So my father worked on the underground at that point, so I tried to avoid the underground, and I told him to be careful and that kind of thing, although he didn't work at that particular station. But when the 7/7 attacks did happen, one of the stations that was attacked was the one that my dad did work at, but interestingly, that wasn't the one I perceived in the experience. He was at Edgware Road.
Right. Yeah.
But so that was the 7/7 one, but there was a much bigger gap with that one, so that's why I kind of don't talk about it so much, because I don't have as much verification with that one. But it definitely gave me kind of like a warning essentially, and I avoided that part of London. I was living in Hackney at the time, so I would sort of avoid going through that particular, getting the Circle line or the Hammersmith and City line, that part of London. I would avoid it as best I could for the few months until the actual event happened, which was multiple attacks all across London that were all in sequence essentially.
Yeah, not good. No, I don't think I'd want to do it either. I wouldn't want to go there for a few months.
I mean, where do you think these warnings come from? Is this some? And again, I don't expect you to nail anything to the post, because it's a loaded, massive question. But is it something that's in your own consciousness? There's something, because you are regularly leaving your body, you're kind of more open to this, or do you feel? And I don't want to get too far down. Do you feel basically it could be like a spirit guide who's kind of feeding this information, or just some energy from elsewhere? And kind of what do they want you to do with it, I guess?
I don't really go with the spirit guide sort of daemon sort of idea, because it doesn't sort of really, it feels like I'm living the experience and making choices within the experience. So it's almost like I'm going into an alternate timeline or reality or something like that. It doesn't feel like a message. It feels more like a particular experience that I'm then looking around and learning about. But having said that, I do feel sometimes there seems to be some guidance to why I maybe go to a particular place or experience a particular thing. So I'm not closed off to that possibility, but it feels more like to do with the emotional impact of these events. I feel like it's more the power and the impact that they kind of leave on the collective psyche, if you like. This kind of, it's almost like the collective unconscious or something like that. If you know about the Global Consciousness Project, for example, where they have the devices all over the world, it feels like when there's a powerful emotional event, it sends kind of ripples. Because it also, if it was like a spirit guide. I'm not sure why I would see some experiences that don't bear any relevance to me. Obviously, those two do, because I was living in London at the time. But I've also had experiences, for example, in about 2013, I think it was, I I saw a major flood that was going to happen in the US, again about 5 days before it happened. Um, I actually emailed Anthony Peake about that. Actually, before it happened, I sent him an email saying that I'd had this OBE and I'd seen these like major floods in the US, and then the reports came out about, I think it was about a week later, so around that sort of time scale.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting to me, because I don't have any kind of relationship with that. I don't have any connection to the US, and there was no real reason for me to pick up on
No.
flooding there, other than the fact that it was kind of a major event that was about to happen, that a lot of people would obviously be affected by.
Yeah, it does. It does always interest me when, there's a history of these sort of things happening, but it tends to be things which are usually negative, or, some catastrophe or some type of disaster, rather than other things. So I do think that it's something to do with the consciousness of an event, or the pre, should we say, of the consciousness of the event,
Yeah.
the build up. And I think that's, you have like a magnetism to it, maybe. The consciousness has some type of magnetism to
It
a huge wave of stuff it's about to happen,
it
because there's
can
been quite a few things that have documented over the years, hasn't there, Marcus?
Yeah, it kind of makes me think. We touched on it right in the opening about certain. We were talking about locations, but like energy is kind of being important in how things are like communicating. It's almost as if like it could be. I was saying to you there, why do you think you get these visions and well, not visions, but kind of peeks into a different of
Yeah.
future events, basically. And it just kind of makes me think: is it just coincidence in the sense of, like Steve was speaking about, negative waves of energy, and you might just happen to be in the right place, like physically, to kind of experience this wave of energy that's coming at you. So, I mean, there's lots of things to think about. I mean, just changing course slightly, we were talking about visions of the past, and I've spoken to a few people who have claimed, at least, to have had visions of the future. One young lady, she's based out in the Far East, and she was saying she was X amount of years in the future, but she was looking at her home city, and what it was like, say, 100 years down the line. And she provided some amazing details, and nothing over the top. So it was really quite believable. I mean, have you had anything like that? And if not, have you heard of any other experiences who have had similar visions of the future?
Going like hundreds of years or into the future. No, I haven't had anything like that. No, nothing comes to mind of examples of things like that.
Right. Have you tried remote viewing, Graham? I'm just very curious
Yeah, I do
because,
remote viewing.
yeah, very similar. Yeah.
I've met several other people. I've done remote viewing with Russell Targ and people like that in the
Right.
US. I've spoken at the International Remote Viewing Association
Oh,
conference,
yes, I know it. Yes.
and I've
Right.
also taken part in scientific research where I did
Yeah.
remote viewing
Okay.
and OBEs. Actually, I used a combination of approaches, but
Yeah.
there were targets set up in the US, and then I had to try and perceive them from. I was living in Estonia at the time, so I was trying to perceive
Right.
them from Estonia. So, and we got positive results with that.
Well,
So,
that's really good. I mean, of course, there is quite a few things that have been mentioned about remote viewing being able to breach space time, and
yeah,
so you go into the future, into the past, as well as maybe into space. It's been utilized numerous different times. So it does seem to be that there's no parameter there. Only our own mind is a parameter as to say if we can do it or not.
I
But
think these
there is
things are
something.
one thing.
Yeah,
Just going to
We
ask you
tend to
this.
divide them up for the purposes of language, but
yeah,
remote viewing is a controlled protocol for using clairvoyance, and an out of body experience is a full immersive multi-sensory psychic experience. So I think remote viewing is sort of at one end of a continuum, and OBEs are at another end. And all the other psychic abilities, they're just sort of sensory differences. So one might be, you know, clairvoyance, which is seeing, another might be clairaudience, so hearing, and you know, things like that. So it's kind of, it seems to me that you have like certain active senses in a psychic sense, and then you have the full sensory experience which would be an OBE. So I think that's kind of how I tend to view it, that they're just degrees, if you like.
Can I just ask you there then, because I was just going to ask you that. I mean, and I'm just going to say the same thing, that, you know, there do seem to be different parts of the spectrum. Given that you can learn remote viewing, and given that you can learn astral projection and out of body experiences, what are your thoughts on such things as clairvoyance? Where do you draw the line? Telepathy, telekinesis. Do you think these are things that humans can access from within themselves and do? And do you think everybody can learn this, ideally, at least anyway? What are your thoughts on that? Because it opens up the whole spectrum of so-called paranormal abilities.
I think it's just aptitude, like a lot of things, you know. It's just why does one person become a virtuoso musician and another person can't even get a single note to sound, you know, or why can one person speak 7 languages and another person can barely speak 1, you know. I think it's just the nature of probably the age that you start being interested in things and being active and learning things. I see it really, what I do, like being an elite athlete, really. I kind of work on every single aspect of, from nutrition to mental focus to, you know, regular practice to having an immersive sensory deprivation room in my home, to, you know, I take it to the max in terms of how I approach it, which I think a lot of people, when they're sort of elite at a particular thing, that's what they do. You know, they've taken it to that level, and nearly always they started when they could barely walk. You know, so with me, you know, my experiences start at like 5 years old, and then by 11 I'm having OBEs, 11, 12, and you know, then by 14 I'm consistently doing it. So I think you see that in many areas of life. But I think whether anyone can do it, I think yes, they to a degree they can learn it within the limitations of their own aptitude for that particular ability, you know, which I think is true of anything. So if they put in enough time and effort and things like that, luckily we have much better techniques and methodologies. Now I really dig into the science, and I'm always doing statistical analysis of the students I work with to try and see, okay, so something worked for this student, what can I learn from that I can then apply on a broader spectrum? So I don't just base how I teach on myself, I base it on scientific data and the people I work with, because I'm trying to improve, I'm trying to optimize, I'm trying to kind of make it as efficient as it can be. So I would say things have evolved since I first started in this area, and I've, you know, learned a lot more about what are the mechanisms that induce these kinds of experiences.
Can I just pick up on the nutrition that you mentioned? Because I was reading a little bit about this with you today, actually, and what can you talk to us about this? Is this just generally eating healthy, looking after yourself, making sure you get, you know, vitamins, nutrients, etc., or is this a diet that's tailored towards having these experiences? Because I know some researchers have suggested eating certain foods can possibly leave you more open to paranormal, and again, that's very, you know, suggestive, and it's not necessarily scientifically grounded. But I mean, yeah, could you talk to us a bit about that, Graham?
Well, we do have some actual real data now, because there's a researcher called Michael Dorr who was previously one of my students, and he decided to do his PhD looking at this topic. So I did an informal study where I sort of gave my students an optimal diet based upon what I'd learned. So it was plant-based, but it also focused on certain nutrients and you know, some supplements and things like that to try and optimize their likelihood of having an OBE. And it showed a significant improvement in both the frequency and the quality of their OBEs. So Michael Dorr was interested in this, and whether you know, this, because it was an informal research that I did. It wasn't sort of laboratory based or anything like that. So he decided to do some research, and he did first an informal piece of research that I was involved with as well. And then he did more kind of an analysis, like actually sort of controlling for different factors. And then eventually he did a Gansfeld experiment, which is sort of mild sensory deprivation for people who don't know. He used that to then do psychic experiments, and he controlled for people who ate a kind of ordinary diet, kind of average diet, then vegetarians, then vegans, then people who fast as well. The vegans did the best by quite a significant margin, and then the people who fast also did well. So we've now got sort of data on that, and I think what I found in my research is certain nutrients, like I mentioned, seem to be particularly beneficial to OBEs. And there's a lot of research looking at things like supplements for different things can be beneficial as well. You know, a lot of people know with lucid dreaming, for example, about galantamine or things like that. These different supplements and things that people can take that cause certain benefits in the brain that then lead to a higher chance of having an OBE. But it's funny how people are very open to the idea that supplements can be beneficial, but they can be quite closed off to the idea of nutrition and diet being beneficial, which to me is funny, because it's like, well, when you do it with nutrition, it's basically you're just getting those things in their natural form rather than using a supplement.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's where I've sort of gone with that.
So what's happening? I want to ask you, Graham, what's happening with the brain at the time of these incidents? Then is it are you sleep, rapid eye movement, or is it theta? Do you have any idea what's actually going on in the brain during these incidents?
I've looked at my own brain using neurofeedback or EEG. I've looked at the research. There doesn't actually seem to be a consistent brainwave pattern with OBEs.
Okay.
You can say some brainwaves are maybe more common. So, like you say, maybe sort of theta, delta, gamma, those sort of deeper levels. But you also see alpha being dominant as well. You know, so some of my experiences looking at my brainwaves, they were in alpha. They weren't in it. I don't think brainwaves are the secret with OBEs.
No,
it seems too varied. You literally see. I mean, with deep meditation, you seem to see a consistency, but with the thing with OBEs, they can arise from deep trance or deep meditation states, but they can also arise from someone just walking around. I've had a student who was driving their car and had an OBE, and there's also cases of that in the literature. Not advised, not a good idea, but people do describe things like that.
Unwantedly, you mean, so that it just
spontaneous experience, right. And I've had experiences where, for example, one case where I was walking down the stairs towards my sort of kitchen diner and the flat I lived in at the time. I was walking down the stairs and I felt the vibrational state start to come over me. So I just laid down on the floor and went out of body. You know, I sort of made the decision, will I go with it or will I try and resist it? So I decided to go with it. So I laid down and went into the out of body experience. But you know, so they can arise in so many different ways and contexts, even, you know, cardiac arrest with in the case of near-death experiences,
trauma
and things. So
absolutely. I mean, is it the same? Is it the same reversal then, that I mean, how long can you actually be out of the body, or is there a certain parameter of time, or are you drawn back even against your wishes to the body? I mean, I'm just curious, what happens if you know, how long a visit can it be that way? And if not, what's the situation? What would be the situation? Would you be permanently disconnected from your body? What's your views on that? I'd be really interested to find out.
I in my personal experience, the average OBE is about 20 minutes long, and the longest I've had was about 12 hours.
12 hours.
But that's very, very rare. but I was in a deep state, some kind of deep trance.
Are you pulled back then, Graham, or is it just purely by choice you go back?
I don't really subscribe to the astral body, like that there's something going out. I am a lot closer to the idea of a sort of extended mind, or that consciousness is what's traveling, or at least interacting in some way with the world. So I don't tend to see it. I don't think we're like a Russian doll and we've got all these like bodies inside and we pop out and off we go. I think it's more, a bit more complex than that. But yeah, so I tend to see it as more that it's a consciousness related thing. So connecting to a larger consciousness of some form. We don't know what that is exactly or how that works. There are different ideas like the microtubules from so Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff's theory, or Anthony Peake's talking about the glial cells and things like that. So there are different models for how the brain might be entangled, and I definitely think that's the most likely framework, that it is something like being a computer connected to a network, connected to the internet kind of type of thing, because then that would maybe explain why there can be sort of data or consciousness or information separate from the body, but then also operate in the body. So I tend to think the brain is key. I don't see the brain as a receiver, which is a popular idea within near-death research. I see it more as an interactive thing. I think that consciousness quite possibly does arise from the brain, but then is a part of a bigger system as well. So it's kind of a two-way process. But even if it does arise from the brain, even if it disconnects, you've still got everything.
I get that. I mean, it's not a new theory, is it? I mean, many years ago we were referring to a pool of consciousness, that we would tap into, because it's apparently, many people have said it's instant as well, thoughts. Which means it feels like it's almost tangible, something that you.
But I think what people have generally said in the past was more that it was, coming into us, so consciousness being fundamental, and then the brain is just like a receiver, and that consciousness is an external thing, or is just happening in the spirit or whatever. So I think what I'm sort of getting at, I think, is that there's that it's probably arising in the brain, but extending beyond it.
Can I just ask you on this one then, because I completely agree with this, and actually, like you say, there's this, like, is consciousness, is it within or is it coming from the outside? I mean, I was speaking to and I was speaking to Anthony Peake, actually, of all people, about this, and I was telling him about a recurring dream that I've had since I was a kid. I won't go into detail about that, but what he was saying is, rather than being, because I was saying, could this be a past life memory, for example? And he was saying it very well could be, but he also said that, when you dream, and I'll get to the question in a moment, it's another extent of your consciousness that's going out into different realms. And he was saying that you could be accessing another person's memories through this, like you were speaking about there, collective consciousness. And so there's been a lot in, a lot of research papers in scientific journals and just general media platforms about dreams and researches into dreams, and people saying that dreams could be another form of out-of-body experience, perhaps where you're latching onto another realm, or maybe another dimension. I don't want to get too down the sci-fi silly route, if you like, but is studying dreams perhaps worthwhile in kind of opening up more, not possibilities, but more information for what out-of-body experiences are, and in turn, what consciousness is?
Well, I should highlight, I don't do OBEs from sleep or dream.
Okay.
So fundamentally have very little to do with dream, because I do my OBEs from a conscious waking state, much more akin to something like hypnosis or deep meditation. So that's important to highlight, first of all. In terms of dreams being called OBEs, I think that's really a side effect of the internet, to be honest, and the nonsense that gets spread. I think dream states or sleep states are just another state. As I was mentioning, OBEs arise from so many different states. obviously, if your body is in the shutdown stage, so i.e. in this context sleeping, I prefer to say shutdown, because everyone's heard the mind awake, body asleep kind of quote from Robert Monroe. But I think that can be unhelpful, because the body's not necessarily asleep. You know, even in near-death experiences, the body's in a cardiac arrest. So
are you just referring to the input-output blockades during?
It's shut down, so it's not asleep. It's shut. You know, the brain is shut down. So that kind of interests me, that it arises from many different states from which the body is in some form of shutdown state. And one of those possibilities, one of those options is dream states or sleep states. So I think OBEs can arise from that state, and I think dream states can be very powerful for accessing psychic information. So there's the famous cases of precognition is very common in dream states. There was Dunn, the famous writer, who wrote an experiment with time, and in that he describes his own sort of dream journals and how he kind of found that he had lots of small precognitions through his dreams. Rupert Sheldrake, who I've worked with, also repeated that particular experiment and worked with that himself. So there's a good body of data associating dreams, especially with precognition and other sort of psychic connections and things like that. But I think the thing is, we have to ask, are they particularly relevant to dreams, or is this just another state of human consciousness that things arise? Because, for example, if someone has a precognitive experience, they're walking down the street, say, and they just have a gut feeling, oh, I should stop. And then, you know, a car zooms past at high speed or something, and it saves their life that they had that gut feeling. We don't say, are precognitions associated with ordinary everyday consciousness? Even though many people have experiences of precognition in that ordinary consciousness. So I guess the question becomes then, are they more frequent in dreams or more frequent in waking states? And it seems that they happen in both. So they may be slightly more common in dreams, because the general sensory apparatus is not active, and you're able to access more of your own awareness. But I think really these states are accessible from every type of conscious state. It's just that dreams are, you know, more commonly when we might like associate them, let's say.
Do you think more and more people than we might think actually experience this stuff? Because I find myself rabbiting all the time about how the paranormal's all around us all. I mean, you know, to start with, for now, what we call the paranormal could well be the normal once science finds out what's going on. So just to say that, but the paranormal's almost all around us all the time, and I kind of argue a lot that it happens to people and they don't even realize it. A good example is what you just said there. You're walking down the street, I'll just stop, and then a car zips past, and you think, So, I mean, I was speaking to a friend the other day about a time I fell down the stairs, for example, in my house. And as I fell, I heard in my mind go flat, and I put my arms like that, and I kind of just zipped down the stairs. And it was probably that which stopped me breaking an arm and a leg, you know, because I was just completely flat. And I was saying, although I do think that was just my own subconscious mind saying, we're in trouble, do this. I kind of think, well, what if that was something? What if that was an energy? Blah, blah, blah. So do you think people do experience the paranormal all the time and just dismiss it because they just kind of think, nah, you know, and don't give it a second thought?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. I think it is far more common than people admit. I mean, in my work, I meet people all the time who say, "Oh, I had one of those experiences," but it, you know, even sometimes with veridical or objective elements, and they'll still just dismiss it. They'll say, "Oh, it was just a hallucination," or "It was just, you know, just a dream," or "It was just this or just that," you know. And I find that really fascinating, because they dismiss it because it's not incongruency or whatever with their worldview. It just doesn't fit. So they'll just dismiss it. So I guess that's interesting to me. But then other people who maybe go too far with it as well, and just kind of like everything becomes kind of paranormal when obviously there are coincidences and there are, you know, our own biases and things like that as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so I think it's about maybe sort of finding the balance with those things. But I definitely do feel that it's something that's very common, because I do think it's natural, like you were saying about, you know, one day science might consider this to be
Normal.
normal.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's considered paranormal, but that's, like you said, that's only because we currently don't have a model. We don't have any framework to explain it. We can talk about, there are major scientists talking about that it might be quantum in nature. So this isn't just woo-woo nonsense. This is major scientists like Sir Roger Penrose or Brian Josephson or others who talk about these quantum effects in the brain that may well be the basis of what's going on. But you know, we don't know. Ultimately, we don't have like solid evidence to show what is causing these things. So I think until that happens, it's always going to be very difficult to deal with it, I guess, or to address it in a
Yeah.
scientific way.
Yeah, and I would assume that, you know, the Western world is a little backward regarding what we consider about consciousness, and these type of experiences, where other countries just take it verbatim as it's part of life. You know, it is
They can
interesting that.
have quite negative viewpoints.
Oh yeah, some of
You
them
know.
do have negative viewpoints, but some of them consider that it's quite a spiritual thing. It's part of life. We like to obviously come try and find answers, you know, but we don't always know if there is one. I think that's the problem, isn't it? We're looking desperately to find answers, but we don't know if there is an answer.
I think I'm just exploring personally. I'm not trying to explain it. I'm not
No.
focused on the
Oh, there are
theories.
some though trying to,
Oh yeah, for sure.
you know,
In
but
my work, I think I'm more coming from the experience first. And I
yeah,
think the more we understand about the experience, the more it will give us clues and hints to what might be going on. I think that's really the key. So what I'm trying to do is go as deep as I can into what the experience is, how it's induced, what you know, what
yeah, I
makes it
know,
more
yeah,
vivid, last longer, all these kinds
yeah.
of things, because that tells us what the experience might really be.
Yeah, I know, like for the last 40, 50 years, people have been looking for pattern recognition in regarding why certain people have these abilities. You know, is it to the upbringing, the belief situation, their age status? You know, is it their influence on their, you know, what they've brought up to know, social conditioning? Who knows? You
That's
know, and I
part of what
still,
makes it interesting, to be
well,
honest with you,
yeah, I
because like
don't
we were
think they
saying at the
pinned it
beginning,
down. I think it's just
I think
varieties, any.
some people have abilities, some people don't. Like we spoke
Yeah,
about before, we spoke about that at the beginning. I mean, you're on about the experience there, and I don't want to go again. I don't want to go too far down conspiracy type avenues or anything. But hopefully, I won't do. But we were speaking to an out of body experience well, it was a couple of months ago, and he was talking about when he has out of body experiences, he sometimes sees entities, basically, like he called them guides or just other realmy, other dimensional entities. And he described them a lot like, basically, as soon as it sounds like grey aliens, very similar kind of thin framed and things like that. We mentioned about ancient gods and almost shamans, for example, people who communicated with the gods, and they probably put themselves into an out of body experience too. And then when we look at some of the old statues, again, they've got that grey alien thing. I know you've got the ancient astronaut stuff, but if we take that out and we just think, well, maybe these are people that these shamans have actually seen on the other side. What I'm going to get at is, do you think at least some claims of alien abduction could actually be out of body experiences, possibly near death experiences? Because, you know, people who say they're abducted by aliens, they speak of going towards a bright light, for example, and near death experiences are very similar. We just spoke about the similar entities seen by both. What are your thoughts on that? Could some of these alien abductions actually be out of body experiences that they're, you know?
Well, there's definitely seems to be a relationship between alien abductions and sleep paralysis.
Yeah, true.
And sleep paralysis is a common phenomena associated with OBEs. I don't do it that way. I don't teach it that way. I mainly don't teach it that way because of people have scary experiences. They see things that they
yeah,
don't like because they're having a waking nightmare.
Mm.
So I think it's. I mean, from the stuff I've looked into in terms of alien abductions, mostly it does seem to arise from sleep. and it does seem to have a deep association with the same kind of phenomena as sleep paralysis. So that would be where I would kind of start with that. Whether they could be having an OBE, I mean, I think it's quite feasible, but I also think it's important to kind of highlight that I think there's probably different types of OBE as well. I think there seems to be slight sort of differences, phenomenological differences between, for example, near-death experience cases, experiences from sleep paralysis, experiences from waking state. All of these different contexts from which OBEs arise, there seems to be differences in the structure and how the OBE unfolds. So I think that's kind of relevant as well. So I think possibly the alien abduction things could be related more to the sleep paralysis side of things in most cases. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions to that. I'm not claiming to be an expert on the kind of alien side of things. It's not been something I've done a deep dive into. But from my sort of rudimentary research, it seems to support that kind of idea that it might be related to the sleep paralysis type states.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, we spoke about this before. There's different theories on alien abduction, and a lot that kind of keeps coming up is that connection to consciousness, to conscious travel. So,
well, it's always down to consciousness. I mean, alien abduction phenomenon itself. About 75% of them are all bedroom visitations, about 25% of them aren't, but we can't argue the fact that, that it's not some form of consciousness or some type of out-of-body experience that they're completely unaware of taking place. It's very difficult. Even just the people under the influence of DMT will be absolutely certain that they've had certain experiences, no different than an alien abduction case in some scenarios. It's the problem is what we see. It's our input, isn't it? And what we consider what is real. Those magic word, what is real. Well, over from 10 years ago till now, it seems what is real is getting a very, very thinner and thinner by the day.
Yeah, I mean, the more we find out, the more questions there are. I mean, just changing tack, I'm keeping a little bit on time, but I want to get as much in as we can here, Graham. So apologies for that. But we mentioned about remote viewing, and we know from declassified records, we know it was, the government were doing this in the Cold War, and, they were legitimately, seriously trying to study it. Now, whether that's still going ahead now, who knows? I'm not looking to go down the conspiracy route there, but if science... And I mean, like in full transparency, kind of unlocked the secrets of this, like remote viewing. And I know, you can learn it right now, so it's not like it's hidden away. But to the point where it could be rolled out en masse almost, so this could be done. Do you think there'd be a desire to weaponize such abilities, whether it is to see into the future, whether it is to remote view, which we know they did, or even to travel outside of one's body? We talked about seeing other times. What are your thoughts on that? And you think,
Well, they definitely were trying to weaponize it at the time. There was they were trying to. I mean, because it all started with the Russian program, and the Russians were. Yeah. I mean, it's all a bit hazy. Were the Russians doing it to scare the Americans, or were they really doing it? There were the kind of famous videos of Nina Kalagina, who was, trying to move she was moving objects in the videos, like keys and small objects and stuff. Were they fake and just done as propaganda to try and scare the Americans, or was there any truth to it? Some of the research I've done suggests that Nina Kalagina did have some genuine abilities and did seem to be associated with doing certain things.
She did seemingly suffer from a lot of the pressure of doing a lot of it, apparently.
Yeah. So again, that's an interesting thing. And then so the Americans tried to kind of follow suit and tried to kind of see what they could do. So it started with the spying, but they definitely were looking at OBEs. They did work at the Monroe Institute. They were definitely interested in the whole area. and they were interested in the possibility of sort of psychic assassination and things like that. It just, I think they just found that the espionage side of things was more reliable than the other things they were looking at. So they sort of focused in on that. I think it's quite feasible that probably some of the programs and whatever still do utilize remote viewing in that kind of sense. It's for example, if you talk to police departments, they'll all say we don't use psychics at all. You know, we would not use psychics. That's not our thing. And then you see a TV show with a literal policeman saying, "Yeah, we use this psychic in this case." So it's like there's the official line, and then there's like what really goes on. So yeah, it's kind of
if there's rewards, I guess, if there's rewards for the use of it, then I can't imagine them not attempting that.
There's nothing to lose. It's an extremely cheap technology. You know, people often go on about the 2 million that the US spent on it, but that's pennies in terms of military spending. They spend that on like one device.
Yeah.
No. And that was over 20 years. So, and they did definitely get useful information that they utilized. So when you put it into that context, I think any intelligence agency is going to at least, you know, use that for the possibility. Same with like, you know, the sort of petrol companies and things like that, using dowsers and that kind of thing. They definitely do use those kinds of things.
I mean, it doesn't have to be weaponization. You touched on there about police departments, and you know, again, it's just something I bang on about all the time. They obviously use these people, even if they get given information. How can you not have that in the back of your mind anyway? Even if you say, "Well, I'm not gonna," you're going to. But I mean, so even if it's not weaponization, if it gets to the point where, and there's probably implications for this actually, where you know, for example, again, we can measure precognition. We know it's a fact. We're talking down the line in the future, hypothetically. You could have police departments. You would have like a psychic division, for example. And the implication, I know it sounds bizarre, the implications of this, though, for humanity really could be quite bizarre in itself, because we'd get to the point where we'd have no private thought. If everyone could do this stuff hundreds of years down the line through whatever evolution, or just because they've learned to do so, we'd have no private thoughts. We'd have no anything. Everybody would know everything. So it's a I can't believe I'm actually hearing myself ask this, because I'm normally a person, I want to know everything all the time, and I'm interested in everything. I think there could be a downside to the fact that for humanity, way down the line, where we literally kind of have no privacy almost.
I doubt it, because I think whenever there's sort of a development in terms of technology, there's usually an understanding of how to push back against it, or how to sort of block it to some degree. You know, like I guess if you look at technology, there was in the early days, it was all just everything was like a free for all, and like the information, and everyone could, you know, there were various kind of spying devices, like, you know, on the internet, and there was no encryption or anything yet. And then encryption was developed, and so some people who care about privacy now don't use these companies like Google and Microsoft and all these companies that are literally spying on you and manipulating you day in, day out. I don't use any of them for by the way. But yeah, so I think what might happen in the future is we might develop ways to enhance the abilities. That Michael Persinger, when he was alive in Canada, was doing research where he used a particular configuration of his God helmet, or Corin helmet, as it's more correctly known, that he called the octopus configuration, which was specifically designed to optimize or improve psychic ability, and he was having good results with that.
Is this through the process of certain frequencies being pushed into the brain?
It was using solenoids, so electromagnetic fields on the temporal lobes in a particular configuration that seemed to enhance people's ability to do different psychic tasks. Not major improvements, but significant improvements. So I think that kind of research is a step in the right direction. And it's interesting, again, that it's electromagnetic in nature. Persinger also had a theory that the electromagnetic field of the Earth had enough power in it to contain all of the information of all our thoughts and ideas. So he felt that the electromagnetic field may be the key to it all, and possibly, you know, when you have things like sunspot activity, for example, which affects the electromagnetic field, you have differences in terms of people's psychic abilities and the experiences that they have.
I agree
Russell
with that.
Targ and others have looked at things like that. You know, how the quiet times seem to affect certain psychic abilities, and the more volatile times seem to affect others.
I mean, I think the, you know, the $1 million question is here. When we have these experiences, are we a little bit nearer being spirit as opposed from being a physical self? You know, I mean, are we experiencing the world of what it would be like to be spirit, in a sense of speaking? You know, some form of consciousness that can, you know, that
I
can
think
be
we
out.
are, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most amazing parts about the out of body experience,
Yeah.
is that it allows us to experience it directly for ourselves. You know, there's all these questions: what is the nature of kind of spirituality, or do we live forever, or do we, you know, live after our death? These kinds of questions. I think the OBE is the most direct way we can explore those questions. It's maybe not going to answer the question fundamentally,
No.
especially if you get taken down the sort of self-delusion road, which definitely can be a factor in this. If you believe everything that you see, and
Well, yeah.
you know, people, you know, there's all this nonsense, like, you know, we live in a prison world and all this kind of silliness. But you know, it's like you can explore those questions, and you can kind of question things and see what works and what doesn't work, and what might be true and what might not be true, and those kinds of things. So yeah, I think it's important to utilize these abilities to answer or explore these questions.
Can I just ask you about, because Steve said there about spirit and how he experiences spirit, and I kind of like that notion. But I mean, what are your thoughts on, for example, you know, if once you pass over and you become spirit and you go to spirit, there's loads of different theories on this. You know, particularly if you say bring reincarnation back in. So what are your thoughts on that? Does that mean that spirit, your spirit in that spirit world, still exists there? Or have you come back into the world? Or is reincarnation, these so-called past life memories, are similar to what I was talking about earlier, where we're not actually remembering past lives, we're kind of tapping into this collective consciousness of past lives? Because, you know, me and Steve spoke about this.
Well, that's
you know,
the super psi theory.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I lean more towards the super psi theory, that basically that we are tapping into consciousness, but I am aware that there are things that contradict that. So I can't be kind of fully wedded to that, for example. So Erlander Haraldsson was an Icelandic researcher who I met a few times, and organized some events for, you know, brought him over to talk to different groups. And he used to work with Ian Stevenson, who was sort of like the original major person when it comes to reincarnation cases. And Erlander and Ian Stevenson went to Sri Lanka, and they worked with lots of different children. And these children were saying that they had different past life memories. But the thing that Erlander said to me when I said about this kind of super psi idea, that, okay, isn't it just they're tapping into this like larger consciousness? He said, well, the thing that contradicts that is they often have physical traits and signs from the previous life. So, for example, if they've been, there was one kid that had been shot in the previous life, and in his current life he had a birthmark in the same position that the bullet had been in reality. So Erlander's point was, well, how, you know, if it's just this mental, you know, noise that you're sort of picking up on, why do they also have these physical traits? And also the other problem with that theory is, why are these kids just sort of focusing in on just these one individual? You know, you don't get kids who say, oh, I've got some memories from this person and some memories from that person. If it was just some kind of connection to a larger system of information, of different thoughts and memories, etc., you would kind of expect it to be from multiple people. Why is it that they specifically feel they were another person? So those are the things that sort of contradict that idea, I guess. The things that make me think, well, we have to still keep a bit more open, because I think, you know, we can't categorically say the evidence supports that it's only super psi or it's only this larger consciousness connection, because the cases themselves don't really support that. I mean, I definitely know that I have a bit of a bias towards the more scientific in my outlook. I'm kind of aware of that, although I've trained in esoteric systems. I've been in various groups. I've pretty much consider myself a pagan and things like that. So I come from a sort of esoteric background, but I've kind of moved more towards science. But at the same time, I sort of lean away from the very sort of, I guess, stereotypical kind of spiritual, you know, spirits on clouds kind of things. But then people do experience that, and I've experienced that, so I can't dismiss that either. So it still has to be on the table, if you like. But how we understand that is very tricky. But then if we go into what you were saying as well, so you said that was about the reincarnation thing, but then there's the kind of, are we still up there in this sort of other reality, sort of when we die? So I've had experiences that would confirm that as well. So one thing that could be a possibility is reincarnation cases could be in specific contexts. So, for example, many of the cases are people who've died unexpectedly, or they have kind of unfinished business. So when you talk to a lot of the children, and I have done that directly as well, they will describe that in the previous life, that usually they died in an accident, or they were murdered, or something like that. So they've got this sort of unfinished business aspect. Obviously, that's not all cases, but it's interesting that a lot of the children will describe something along those lines. One of the children I spoke to remembered being a man who fell down a flight of stairs. He was already quite elderly, and he fell down a flight of stairs and sort of died unexpectedly. So the boy remembered that, for example. So, and Erlander Haraldson's research also identified quite a lot of kids that said the same sorts of things. So it could be one possibility that reincarnation only happens in a particular context, whereas continuing in some other form is the more common form. Could be that, but these are all just possibilities. Again, we need to really dig into the evidence.
I'll just jump in and ask, because you mentioned about reincarnation and there being certain circumstances. Like I said at the beginning, I've had a recurring dream, not so much now, but when I was younger, and just quickly I was in some kind of war. I know I'm holding a gun. I'm basically taking shelter somewhere, and I can hear voices all around me. I can't understand them. Then I'm found, and then I basically always wake up. Fast forward to when I was a teenager, and I kind of shaved the back of my head because I'm stupid and young, like we all are at one point. And at the back of our neck there, is obviously still there today, is a really bizarre kind of birthmark in the shape of what you might say is a shotgun blast. And so I've always made that, oh, well, that's probably is a reincarnated memory, blah, blah, blah. And then when I've spoken to people like Anthony Peake and now yourself, and, you know, so you start to think, well, it might be more complex than that. And just to quickly say this, my grandma's brother, my grandma's German, and her brother went missing in the Second World War, presumed dead, obviously. They never found his body. No one knows what happened to him. So then I started thinking of the fact, well, maybe, are you reincarnated from your grandma's brother? But then when I started thinking about consciousness, perhaps that's why I'm able to access this apparent memory, because of the family bloodline connection between, you know, my grandma's brother who went missing and obviously myself. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, like you said about certain circumstances, could that connection, whether it's through family or just through closeness, could that reason why you might remember certain lives and past lives and not others?
Yeah, well, I do think there's an ancestral aspect. I mean, I think all cultures throughout time really have emphasized the ancestral connection. I've had in my first book, Avenues of the Human Spirit, I talk about this experience I had where I got the word Odin in my head incredibly vividly, walked up onto a hill and saw a bolt of lightning and a shooting star in reality at the same time as hearing this word Odin. And then a few days later, I had a vision of a rune, and I looked up the runes and it didn't match with any of the runes. And then later on, I managed to find that rune and realized that it was actually the Anglo-Saxon rune to do with Woden,
right.
who is the Anglo-Saxon version of Odin.
Yes.
So I always took this as, some kind of ancestral connection, some kind of, it was so interesting that it was specifically the Anglo-Saxon version that I picked up on. So I think that, and you see this across cultures. You see people, and even in our modern world, like picking up on things that seem to be ancestral, and then they look into their heritage and they find that they do have a link with a particular culture that they didn't know they did, and these kinds of things. So yeah, I think whether it's reincarnation or whether it's some kind of ancestral thing, but I think, yeah, it all leads back to this idea that there is some kind of bigger consciousness, the collective unconscious, the 0 point field, the larger consciousness system, there's all these different names for this concept of this bigger system. And it does seem to be the case, because when you go into an OBE, you can connect with that. I had another experience while out of body that if you look up the painting by Alex Gray called The Universal Mind Lattice, it's kind of like this fountain of energy. I had an experience of something that looked exactly like that, and I went into the center of it. It was vast, huge, and I was like a tiny little speck, and I went into the center of it. And when I was in that, it was exactly like what we're talking about. It felt like I was a million billion minds all at once. It wasn't like a universal consciousness. It was like individual consciousnesses, millions of them. It was like I could think with them and perceive them and grasp different thoughts and perceptions from all over the world. It seemed like, or maybe beyond. And that experience, like, I can only sort of just grasp the memory of it, like, because it was so far beyond what my mind can do normally. I can only sort of remember how it felt to be in that particular situation, in that particular state. But right from then, that was quite an early experience, probably I was probably, I don't know, 18, 19, something like that when that happened. That experience has kind of stayed with me because it just showed, like, I was already thinking about this idea of interconnected mind, interconnected consciousness, because that seemed to be what my experiences were showing me. And that, so I think that's, it all leads back to that, really.
Yeah, I'm curious, Graham, what your views are in regards to the telepathy tapes and the non-speaking autism and the things that they've discovered regarding these children that seem to go to the hill, this location. I mean, have you looked a little bit at that? I just wonder what your opinion was on it.
I've looked into them to an extent. I mean, I think there does seem to be a correlation with various different kinds of neurodivergence. Essentially, I'm dyslexic and ADHD, so I think on these different spectrums of perception or alterations in how our brains work, I think you do get these kinds of things arising. And obviously very autistic people can be highly fixated, so they can be incredibly good at playing a particular thing or doing mathematical equations or whatever it might be. And I think that can also materialize in more kind of psychic type things as well.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah.
And I think with telepathy, we have some of the most robust evidence in terms of
Yes.
psychic abilities. It's telepathy has been, demonstrated again and again and again. I organised some experiments with Rupert Sheldrake looking at telepathy, where we used telephone telepathy. So people would have to press a number on their keypad to say who they thought was on the phone to them. And then only once they'd selected the number did the phone open up and they could see who it was. So
yeah.
Fascinating stuff. I'm just keeping an eye on time, so I don't want to run over. So I suppose a good place to end this in is, I mean, and again, it's a loaded question, so I apologize for this. But I mean, where do you feel research is going to go in the future in this? And not so much exclusively with out of body and astral projection and consciousness, but do you feel it'll start to explain, how do I word this? Some of the more out there paranormal experiences, whether they are UFOs, alien abductions, even possibly cryptid creature sightings. Do you think that studying consciousness, studying how our brains react to the environment around us and how it's stimulated and what stimulates it, do you think we might start to find answers? And do you think we'll start to kind of work together? Do you think we'll see a bridging between science and more non-academic, shall we say?
Well, I mean, in my own work, I'm moving more towards doing academic stuff and moving more towards doing scientific research. I just released a paper just recently, it's a new OBE, like OBE scale. If you've heard of the Grayson scale, that's used for near-death experiences in terms of how they define what an OBE is. It's kind of looking at that. I mean, with my own work, I'm definitely interested in taking my own like infraliminal research, which is my sound technology that isn't binaural beats. It actually uses like infrasound and different things to try and induce OBEs, because I found that binaural beats didn't really do much for me personally. They never really had much of an effect. So I started to explore, are there other forms of sound that have an impact? And as many people know, especially looking at kind of ghost phenomena and things like that,
you've got about 19 hertz,
infrasound seems to help with perceiving those kinds of things and connecting to those kind of things potentially. So I started to experiment with that, and I, over years, starting in about 98, developed the infraliminal sound. So that's designed to get people to the vibrational state, which then leads to the OBE. So I'm interested in where that could go. There's been some research in Ireland. I live in Ireland now. There's been research done looking at the infraliminal sound with people with addiction and things like that, and it's helped them significantly, helped them to get off of drugs and things like this. So I'm interested in its potential for benefit to people in terms of possibly healing and things, and I'm also interested in, can it open up consciousness more? Can it help people in a non-drug based way to sort of connect with their own with that interconnected consciousness, that bigger consciousness? So that's kind of another area that I'm looking at, as well as the sort of academic stuff.
Good. It's good.
Good
research.
Definitely. Look, Graham, I know you're a busy man, so I don't want to keep you too long. So before we go, and it's been fascinating speaking to you, really, it has. And it's been well worth the wait as well. So thank you very much. But before you do go, what have we got coming up? What's going on in Graham Nicholls' world? Any books, talks, lectures, plans that you've not told the world of about yet? Floor's yours, my friend.
Well, I have a live course coming up with the Rhine Research Centre, because I work a lot with the Rhine Research Centre. That's one of the organisations I've been a subject in their experiments. So that's one of the groups that got positive results in the laboratory, because I think I'm the only person in the OBE field, really, especially like OBE authors who've been involved in any scientific research. So yeah, they're running a course starting on the 2nd of March. So that'll be live, and I'm going to be teaching that over 4 weeks.
Is this an online course?
It's an online course,
okay.
So UK, US.
And how would people get to find out about that information?
If they type in Rhine Education Centre.
Oh, it's from their own website, yeah?
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
also on my website, grahamnichols.com, so just my
Okay.
name.com, and they go to events and it's there. In terms of books, I've just re-released a special edition, expanded special edition of Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience, which is my second book, which looks at all of the techniques, practical side of things, the science. It goes pretty deep into all of that. And if people are interested in my more personal spiritual journey, then my first book, Avenues of the Human Spirit, is also available on the normal, like Amazon, etc. And yeah, I also teach in terms of private tuition. There's also a course on my website, a video download course. So yeah, go to grahamnichols.com. There's all the stuff on there, basically.
Well, I think it's perfect timing because a lot of people are really interested in this type of subject more now than they were 10 years ago, for an example. You know, it's very talked about in a lot. I mean, I'm on a number of think tanks, and half of them are parapsychologists, and that's all I listen about all day is about these flotation tanks and the studies in relation to music or sound frequencies. You know, it is fascinating. It really
Well,
is.
I use sensory deprivation. I've got a room in the house that's completely blacked out, and
I think that's an underrated experience.
It is, yeah.
I think it's something we could actually bring you back on, Graham, and talk a whole episode on that. So, Graham, look, thank you so much. That was genuinely fascinating speaking to you, really. And we will have to get you back on because I think we've left a lot on the table there, to be honest. But Graham, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. It was good talking to you guys.
Okay, thank you guys for joining us. Make sure that you check us out on social media. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Make sure you check out Graham's books, and make sure you join us next week. Until next time, goodbye and take care.